Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. There was a garden there, and he went into it with his disciples. Judas the traitor knew the place well, since Jesus had often met his disciples there, and he brought the cohort to this place together with a detachment of guards, sent by the chief priests and the Pharisees, all with lanterns and torches and weapons. Knowing everything that he was going to happen to him, Jesus then came forward and said, "Who are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said, "I am he." Now Judas the traitor was standing among them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they moved back and fell into the ground. He asked them the second time, "Who are you looking for?" They said, "Jesus the Nazarene." "I have told you that I am he," replied Jesus. "If I am the one you are looking for, let these others go." This was to fulfill the words he had spoken, "Not one of those you gave me have I lost." Simon Peter, who carried a sword, drew it and wounded the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back in its scabbard. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" The cohort and its captain and the Jewish guards seized Jesus and bound him. They took him first to Annas, because Annas was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had suggested to the Jews, "It is better for one man to die for the people." Simon Peter with another disciple followed Jesus. The disciples who was known to the high priest went with Jesus into the high priest's palace, but Peter stayed outside the door. So the other disciples, the one known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who was keeping the door, and brought Peter in. The maid on duty at the door said to Peter, "Aren't you another one of that man's disciples?" He answered, "I am not." Now it was cold, and the servants and guards had lit a charcoal fire and were standing there warming themselves. So Peter stood there too, warming himself with the others. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly for all the world to hear. I have always taught in the synagogue and in the temple where all the Jews meet together. I have said nothing in secret. But why ask me? Ask my hearers what I taught. They know what I said." At these words, one of the guards standing by gave Jesus a slap in the face, saying, "Is that the way to answer the high priest?" Jesus replied, "If there is something wrong in what I said, point it out. But if there is no offense in it, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him, still bound, to Caiaphas the high priest. As Simon Peter stood there warming himself, someone said to him, "Aren't you another of his disciples?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relation of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Again Peter denied it, and at once the cock crew. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the praetorium. It was now morning. They did not go to the praetorium themselves, or they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover. So the Pilate came outside to them and said, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They replied, "If he were not a criminal, we should not be handing him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and try him by your own law." The Jews answered, "We are not allowed to put a man to death." This was to fulfill the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the way he was going to die. So Pilate went back into the praetorium and called Jesus to him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. Jesus replied, "Do you ask this of your own accord, or have others spoken to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? It is your own people and the chief priests who have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus replied, "Mine is not a kingdom of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my men would have fought to prevent my being surrendered to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this kind." "So you are a king then?" said Pilate. "It is you who say it," answered Jesus. "Yes, I am a king. I was born for this. I came into the world for this, to bear witness the truth, and all who are on the side of truth listen to my voice." "Truth?" said Pilate. "What is that?" And with that he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no case against him, but according to a custom of yours, I should release one prisoner at the Passover. Would you like me then to release the king of the Jews?" At this they shouted, "No, this man," they said, "but Barabbas." Barabbas was in a brigand. Pilate then had Jesus taken away and scourged. And after this, the soldiers twisted some thorns into a crown and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming to him and saying, "Hail the King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Pilate came outside again and said to them, "Look, I am going to bring him out to you to let you see that I find no case." Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said, "Here is the man." When they saw him, the chief priests and the guards shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I can find no case against him." "We have a law," the Jews replied. "According to that law, he ought to die, because he has claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard them say this, his fears increased. Re-entering the praetorium, he said to Jesus, "Where do you come from?" But Jesus made no answer. Pilate then said to him, "Are you refusing to speak to me? Surely you know I have power to release you, and I have power to crucify you." "You would have no power over me," replied Jesus, "if it had not been given you from above. That is why the one who handed me over to you has the greater guilt." From that moment, Pilate was anxious to set him free, but the Jews shouted, If you set him free, you are no friend of Caesar's. Anyone who makes himself king is defying Caesar's." Hearing these words, Pilate had Jesus brought out and seated himself on the chair of judgment at a place called the pavement, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. It was Passover preparation day, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," said Pilate to the Jews. Take him away, they said. "Crucify him." "Do you want me to crucify your king?" said Pilate. The chief priests answered, "We have no king except Caesar." So in the end, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. They then took charge of Jesus, and carrying his own cross, he went out the city to the place of skull, or as it was called in Hebrew, Golgotha, where they crucified him with 2 others, one on either side with Jesus in the middle. Pilate wrote out a notice and had it fixed to the cross. It ran, "Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews." This notice was read by many of the Jews, because the place where Jesus was crucified was not far from the city, and the writing was in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. So the Jewish chief priests said to Pilate, "You should not write King of the Jews." But this man said, "I am King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had finished crucifying Jesus, they took his clothing and divided into 4 shares, one for each soldier. His undergarment was seamless, woven in one piece from neck to hem. So they said to one another, "Instead of tearing it, let's throw dice to decide who is to have it." In this way, the words of Scripture were fulfilled. "They share out my clothing among them. They cast lots for my clothes." This is exactly what the soldier did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. Seeing his mother and the disciples he loved standing near her, Jesus said to his mother, "Woman, this is your son." Then to the disciple he said, "This is your mother." And from that moment, the disciple made a place for her in his home. After this, Jesus knew that everything had now been completed and fulfilled the Scripture perfectly. He said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of vinegar stood there, so putting a sponge soaked in the vinegar on a hyssop stick, they held it up to his mouth. After Jesus had taken the vinegar, he said, "It is accomplished." And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. It was preparation day, and to prevent the bodies remaining on the cross during the Sabbath, since that Sabbath was a day of special solemnity, the Jews asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken away. Consequently, the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with him, and then of the other. When they came to Jesus, they found he was already dead. And so instead of breaking his legs, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a lance, and immediately there came out blood and water. This is the evidence of one who saw it, trustworthy evidence, and he knows he speaks the truth, and he gives it so that you may believe as well. Because of this happened to fulfill the words of Scriptures. Not one bone of his will be broken. And again, in another place, Scripture says, they will look on the one whom they have pierced. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one, because he was afraid of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him remove the body of Jesus. Pilate gave permission, so they came and took it away. Nicodemus came as well, the same one who had first come to Jesus at night time, and he brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen clothes, following the Jewish burial custom. At that place where he had been crucified, there was a garden, and in this garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been buried. Since it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was near at hand, they laid Jesus there.